Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. There's a concept known as change, and then there's what's going on with the EEOC this year. So we have a lot of information and knowledge to share with you. And I'm pleased to have Alex Karasik, my partner, join us as one of our presenters. Alex is on our EEOC defense team and has experience in handling EEOC lawsuits across the United States. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you, Jerry, and I'm honored to introduce my partner and our colleague, Greg Tsonis. Greg is part of our EEO defense team as well. He's defended EEOC-initiated lawsuits across the country and regularly contributes to our class action review and EEOC blog. Welcome, Greg.
Thanks, Alex. Next up, we have Jennifer Riley joining our panel. Jen is a partner in the Duane Morris Chicago, Los Angeles, and San Francisco offices, and she's also the vice chair of our class action defense group. Jen's also a co-author of our class action review and the EEOC litigation review that was recently published. And Jen's defended companies facing government enforcement actions for more than 2 decades and regularly defends EEOC pattern and practice lawsuits across the country.
Thanks, Greg. It's a pleasure to be here. We'll start off our program today by hearing from Jerry, who chairs the Duane Morris Class Action Defense Group. Jerry has confronted and defended some of the largest and most complex EEOC systemic cases ever filed against corporate America. His list includes the largest systemic enforcement action ever brought in the history of the EEOC, EEOC versus Sterling Jewelers, which Jerry defended and settled for no money. Jerry also led our defense team in EEOC versus Kaplan, where we won on summary judgment at the district court level and then prevailed in the Sixth Circuit. This is one of the EEOC's most famous losses in a nationwide systemic case, in an opinion that the Wall Street Journal called the opinion of the year. Jerry has probably handled and defended more EEOC lawsuits than any other lawyer in the country. The EEOC has also, interestingly, asked Jerry to speak at its annual training academy for EEOC lawyers. So it's a pleasure to have Jerry on our panel today.
Thanks so much. So without further ado, we came up with 5 topics that characterize the change and the transformation in the EEOC under the Trump presidency. These 5 topics are based on phone calls from corporate counsel, business leaders, and HR professionals. We thought that going over these 5 topics would give you a good handle on what's new at the EEOC and how to get your compliance priorities and strategies in order for 2025. So, Jen, kick it off to you on the new case filings.
Thanks, Jerry. So this slide shows the EEOC's filing activity over each of its past 5 fiscal years. The EEOC's fiscal year 2025 spans from October 1, 2024 through September 30, 2025. We're at the midway point. Through the midway point of this fiscal year of 2025, the EEOC has filed 23 enforcement lawsuits. That's an uptick when compared to the 14 lawsuits filed at the midpoint of fiscal year 2024, but still down from the 29 filed in the first 6 months of fiscal year 2023.
So when we look at EEOC enforcement activity, we look at it similar to the way that we look at real estate many times. It's all about location, location, location when it comes to analyzing the filings and the litigation trends of the EEOC. And so while we often view the EEOC as a single government agency, when it comes to enforcement actions, it's probably more apt to think about the EEOC as a they, given that the EEOC operates through a series of district offices that vary in terms of the types of cases that they pursue, their priority focus areas, and the number of filings that they pursue each year. In addition to tracking the total number of filings, we closely monitor which of the EEOC's 15 district offices have been most active in terms of the case filings each year. Some districts tend to be more aggressive than others, and some focus on different case filing priorities.
To Greg's point about the certain districts being more aggressive than others, the data reflects that that's true. At this point last year, Philadelphia led the way with 4 filings and ended the year on top with 14 total lawsuit filings. The Atlanta District and Indianapolis offices tied for second with 11 total lawsuit filings. Looking at this year's mid-year data, you're seeing the same thing. Philadelphia is out in front with 5 lawsuit filings already, followed by Indianapolis and Atlanta. What does this suggest? The recent aggressiveness of these 3 district offices is no fluke, and employers in these 3 districts need to pay extra attention to the EEOC offices there because they seem to be aggressive in filing lawsuits at a much higher clip.
Then we look at types of allegations, but at 100,000-foot level, remember that the new administration took office near the last week of January. And so you had the fiscal months of October, November, and December, and 3/4 of January. And if you look at all the numbers that we've shown you on these slides, by and large, they were filed during that 3-month and 3-week period. And since that time, things have kind of fallen off the ledge. It's not to suggest that the EEOC is asleep at the wheel and not filing lawsuits, but there's been a change, there's been a transformation, and you need to peel back the onion skin and look at the EEOC's filings and what it's doing as pre-change in administration and post-change in administration. One of the numbers that stands out is ADA disability lawsuits, again, is the #1 filing area, followed by gender and followed by retaliation. Retaliation is important because that is the #1 cause of action where the EEOC can stick in the courthouse. Very difficult to secure summary judgment in those types of cases. And so to be relevant, to have a case that is not going to be dismissed, retaliation is still a tool in the EEOC's toolkit in terms of bringing large lawsuits. 2 things to look at is pregnancy based on the new pregnancy amendment law, and then the lack of pay equity cases. The EEOC trumpets it, talks about it in media statements, but when you look at the raw numbers in terms of the types of filings, those aren't there.
So now let's look at the lawsuit filings by statute. Over the first half of fiscal year 2025, 14 of the EEOC's 22 filings, or 64%, contained Title VII claims. The percentage of each type of filing has remained fairly consistent over the past several years, with one exception, which is the first half, of fiscal year 2024, when nearly every filing, 12 out of 14, or 87%, contained Title VII claims. This year's filings are more aligned with years prior to 2024. So going back to fiscal year 2023, Title VII claims comprised 59% of all filings. It was 69% in fiscal year 2022, 62% in 2021. This year, we've also seen, as Jerry mentioned, a rise in the ADA disability claims. The EEOC asserted ADA disability claims in 10 of 22 of those filings, or 45%. That's a substantial increase from 2024, where ADA claims appeared in only 21% of the cases filed through the first half of the year. Notably, the EEOC also filed 2 lawsuits this year so far with ADA, or age claims.
So we also look at the industries against which these EEOC-initiated actions are being filed. And the trends there have remained consistent in the first half of fiscal year 2025 as compared to 2024. So we see in 2024, the 3 main areas that dominated the actions in terms of industries were hospitality, retail, and healthcare sectors. And similarly, so far in 2025, we see those same areas maintaining their lead as corporate defendants in EEOC-initiated litigation. So that's a trend that's been consistent over the last 24 months or so.
Now let's pivot to the actual plans that the EEOC had. Here on this slide, page 10, is the 2022 through 2026 strategic plan. This ought to have a huge asterisk because this was the plan in effect when President Biden resided in the White House, and things are changing now that President Trump is there. And so one of the things that the EEOC focused on that I think is of essential key importance for employers is what is known as systemic discrimination, or where there is smoke, there's apt to be fire. Where there's discrimination involving one person, it's apt to impact many people. And that's basically with respect to the implementation of a personnel policy in terms of the way in which a particular management team does things. And the EEOC is of the view, and has long held the view for over 2 decades, that it does the most good for the most number of people by bringing large-scale systemic cases. As Jen has mentioned, we've developed a skill set in defending those cases, and they're involve anywhere from 1,000 employees to, in one case, 77,000 employees. They look like, feel like, and present costs and risks not unlike class actions. And in the 22 to 26 strategic plans, front and center was about how important it was for the EEOC to both train its staff and to have the capacity to prosecute these cases. They're big news. They're typically press conferences or even TV conferences when the EEOC files one of these. And I think what you're seeing now is, will that remain the centerpiece of the strategic plan going forward? My prediction, my prognostication will be it probably will not. Or if it does, it will involve issues that were not litigated in the past. But in terms of the EEOC focusing on and bringing these large-scale cases, going to Congress every year and asking for budget increases because of how large and expensive these cases are to litigate, I think that that's probably not going to be in the future of the EEOC. Another area to look at is the strategic enforcement priorities. You could take a look at almost every lawsuit and those numbers that we showed you on the initial slides, and they would fit into one of these 6 categories. These, again, are strategic enforcement priorities that were conceived of when President Biden was in the White House. And I would venture to say that if you took a poll or took the temperature of EEOC officials or White House officials, these 6 priorities probably are not the 6 priorities moving forward in the Trump administration. It hasn't been articulated yet, but you'll see it in the case filings, the type of case filings, and the areas of the country. Probably strategic enforcement item number 2, protecting vulnerable workers, those who might have immigration-related issues, those who don't have English as their first language, those who are in low-paying jobs, those who are in states that are on the Mexican border, was an area of prime concern to the EEOC and a litigation engine. I think that's going away, and you're not seeing that. Preserving access to the legal system, the 5th priority. Everything and anything involving challenges to mandatory arbitration programs, retaliation issues. Although retaliation is the 4th largest component of lawsuits brought in the first 3.5 months of the EEOC, it remains to be seen if that will be a priority item, at least on the litigation scorecard, as the EEOC moves forward. There have been pronouncements by Andrea Lucas, who is the new acting chair of the EEOC, appointed by President Trump, that item 6, preventing systemic harassment, is an important priority of the Trump administration. But there's been a change, so to speak, sometimes in the target or the alleged victims at issue. And if there's anything that the new president has articulated, it's his vision and his public policy in terms of labor and employment enforcement, that Americans First would be the group, so to speak, on whose behalf the EEOC would be looking out for. So I think there's been at least a reshuffling of these priorities, or a sense that some of these priorities no longer are going to be a priority. And so to the extent that employers looked at this set of enforcement priority items to set and calibrate their compliance and their strategies in terms of making sure that the EEOC does not come knocking on your door. This is in flux, and this is with change.
And let's look at some of the lawsuit filings so far this year in fiscal year that have been filed in fiscal year 2025. The first one was filed in February 2025 after the start of the Trump administration. That's a case called EEOC versus Team Lighters. In that one, which dovetails with what Jerry just mentioned, the EEOC filed an action against 6 Taco Bell restaurants in Michigan, alleging that a senior area manager had subjected female employees, including multiple teenage employees, to sexual harassment. The sexual harassment allegedly included inappropriate sexual comments, such as asking if underage employees were sexually active, unwanted touching, as well as requests for videos and photos of sexual conduct. The EEOC asserted in that one that the defendant failed to take effective action against that manager, despite having received multiple complaints from different employees, supervisors, and managers. So again, we're talking about a sexual harassment issue that dovetails with what Jerry mentioned as the EEOC's likely priorities moving forward. The 2 others on the slide were filed in 2024. In the first one, it's called EEOC versus Equinox Holdings. That case was filed December 23 of 2024. There, the EEOC brought suit alleging that Equinox, which owns and operates fitness facilities and gyms across the country, illegally discriminated against a woman who suffers from endometriosis. The EEOC alleges in that suit that the applicant asked for her second round interview to be delayed by a few days because she experiences painful menstrual cramps. The EEOC alleges that the company rejected the applicant due to a concern that she would be absent in the future due to her monthly cycle. The EEOC alleges that Equinox subsequently then hired a male applicant who actually had no prior experience working in gyms for that front desk associate position. And then finally, the third case on the slide was also filed in 2024, EEOC versus Alto Experience. In that case, the EEOC filed suit alleging that a ride-hailing company violated the ADA when it denied reasonable accommodations and denied employment to deaf and hard of hearing individuals who had applied to work as personal drivers. The EEOC alleges that this is despite the availability of technological accommodations, and in some instances, despite the driver's previous experience working as drivers for other ride-hailing companies. The EEOC alleges in that one that some qualified deaf and hard of hearing individuals who were denied accommodations or employment as personal drivers were steered into less desirable car washing positions. So these filings overall illustrate that the EEOC will likely continue to prioritize sex harassment, and even disability discrimination claims as we move into the second half of the fiscal year 2025.
Go to the next slide. There's a caveat. It probably belongs here, and it's a notable dismissal. On the prior slide under sections 2 and 3, protecting vulnerable workers and addressing cutting edge issues, the EEOC brought a lawsuit in Michigan called EEOC versus Brick, and it alleged transgender discrimination on the cutting edge of the law. After there was a change in the White House administration, in March, the EEOC went into court in Michigan and said, we are hereby withdrawing this lawsuit and no longer prosecuting it. It made the news because that doesn't happen very often. I've never seen it in the 42 years that I've been handling the defense of EEOC lawsuits. And on April 28th, the federal judge in that case in Michigan said, I have no power to require the government to continue to litigate it. And if the EEOC as an agency wishes to voluntarily dismiss the case because it's no longer interested in prosecuting it, I cannot prevent it. So it was notable insofar it was a lawsuit filed during the Biden administration, withdrawn during the Trump administration.
The EEOC's annual performance report essentially functions as a scorecard where the commission demonstrates how it's adding value using the taxpayer dollars. Here, there's a lot of good statistics that can be mined in terms of what the EEOC's priorities are and what might be ahead. Although this year's might be different because the fiscal year 2024 scorecard or annual performance report looks back at the prior year, and obviously, as our fellow panelists have mentioned, the change in administration might be a change in some of the statistics that we see. But looking at this data, the commission recovered nearly $700 million on behalf of 21,000 individuals, which represented a 5% increase over the prior year. That suggests that there's a lot of money to be had in EEOC-initiated litigation, a lot of money at stake. Whether or not that number continues to climb towards $1 billion might not happen this year, given the presidential regime change and the different priorities, but that is still a significant amount of money. Similarly, the EEOC resolved 33% more lawsuits this past year than it did in fiscal year 2023. Perhaps the outgoing administration in the EEOC of 2024 wanted to get some certainty and resolve some of these cases pending the uncertainty in the elections at the time. And finally, the commission also reported it received 88,531 new charges of discrimination. We've seen, recently the uptick in charges, partly attributable to the EEOC's digital charge system and the increasingly use of technology in terms of processes with the commission. So perhaps that plays a large role in that number going up 9% since the year prior.
As Jerry mentioned earlier, systemic discrimination cases are an important tool in EEOC's toolbox, and we see that in the number of cases both resolved and filed. In 2024, the EEOC resolved 16 cases, securing approximately $24 million for victims of discrimination, which was about double what it had secured in the prior year, in fiscal year 2023. When we look at filed cases, of the 110 lawsuits filed in fiscal year 2024, about 11 or 12% were systemic lawsuits. And that's down from about 17% of cases in 2023, but roughly in line with the percentage that were filed in 2022.
These bar charts, both this page and the next page, demonstrate the money that spiked out of the resolved systemic investigations and then systemic lawsuits. They go up and down during administrations, they go up and down during changes of the law. But I think what you're going to see is, and what you're seeing already, is less filings in this area, despite the EEOC's public-facing pronouncements while President Biden was in the White House. And what you're going to see is a track record, I believe, or I predict, with these numbers going down for the remainder of the fiscal year, now that the new administration is in place. Jen, over to you.
Thanks, Jerry. Notably, progressing through fiscal year 2025, the EEOC's budget includes a $33.22 million increase over 2024. So we can expect the potential there for some increased activity. As to where those resources might be directed, we're going to talk about that over the next few slides. Notably, on March 19, 2025, the EEOC and the DOJ published joint guidance clarifying the federal enforcement agendas targeting illegal DEI practices. The first was a guidance called "What to Do If You Experience Discrimination Related to DEI at Work." That is available on the EEOC's website. It explains that under Title VII, DEI policies, programs, or practices may be unlawful if they involve an employer or other covered entity taking an employment action motivated in whole or in part by an employee's race, sex, or another protected characteristic. The second is called What You Should Know About DEI-Related Discrimination at Work. It's likewise available on the EEOC's website, and it contains similar descriptions and information about DEI-motivated discrimination.
So looking ahead, every new presidential administration brings with it different objectives that they're focused on and different policy priorities. And President Trump and his administration are no exception to that. So since President Trump took office, he's taken unique steps to reshape the commission by firing its chair, 2 commissioners, and its general counsel, all within the course of a few weeks. So there are currently 3 vacant commissioner spots, and Kalpana Kotajal remains a commissioner designated by President Biden in July of 2023, with a term expiring July of 2027. In January of 2025, as Jerry mentioned, Trump appointed Andrea Lucas as the acting chair. Early in February, on the 4th of February, Andrew Rogers was also named acting general counsel. So the commission has already indicated with these new individuals in place that it's committed to carrying out President Trump's policy agenda, consistent with his executive orders related to unlawful DEI-motivated race and sex discrimination, defending biological and the binary reality of sex and related rights, protecting workers from religious bias and harassment, and including anti-Semitism, and as we see so far in the settlement that has been reached this year, anti-American national origin discrimination. So this year, the EEOC announced the first 7-figure settlement it has achieved since President Trump took office in a case titled EEOC versus Leo Palace. In that case, the EEOC settled the lawsuit and entered into a 3-year consent decree with Leo Palace Resort, which was a large hotel in Guam. Under the terms of that agreement, Leo Palace not only had to pay over $1.4 million, it had to hire an external equal employment monitor to settle the allegations that it provided employees of non-Japanese national origin with less favorable wages, benefits, and other terms of employment than it did their Japanese counterparts. And that lawsuit is significant because it's the first time that a 7-figure settlement that the commission has procured was obtained by President Trump and his EEOC agency, and it was accompanied by a statement from acting chair Andrea Lucas announcing the commission's new enforcement agenda and its intent to protect all workers from national origin discrimination and quote unquote anti-American bias. And you see here in the news release that Andrea Lucas put forth. That's a common tactic we see with the EEOC, but one key point in there is an emphasis that the EEOC is illustrating this case as an important reminder that unlawful national origin discrimination includes discrimination against American workers in favor of foreign workers. So we expect to continue to see that as a theme going forward for the rest of 2025.
One more thing I would add to the looking ahead piece is that the commission had launched the Initiative on Artificial Intelligence and Algorithmic Fairness, and it gained a lot of steam the last few years. There has not been much published in that space the first 5 months under the current administration, but I think that's an area to watch. In addition, though, one area where the White House and various government bodies have been active are through executive orders involving DEI. And I think if we look ahead to the EEOC statistics going forward, it'd be interesting to see if there are DEI-related statistics within there.
Each year we publish the Duane Morris EEOC Litigation Review. This is a comprehensive review of filings, settlements, rulings, and other numbers. The 2025 edition is available as an ebook, which you can access by scanning the QR code on the slide on the screen in front of you.
And one thing Jen failed to mention is the price is right. It's free. Well, thank you so much for being with us. We pledged to you that we would join you for 30 minutes today. So we're at our bewitching hour. Here is all our contact information for the clients that send in questions. We will email and telephone you over the next 24 hours. And if you have not already signed up on our Duane Morris Class Action Defense blog to get all this sort of timely news, please give it a try, and you can review our highlights, announcements, and blog postings. So thank you so much for joining us today in our last 30 minutes on the EEOC and the change that's upon corporate America. Have a great day.